Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for Let Cool Be Your Compass, Mapping Military Occupations to Civilian Credentials. My name is Sarah Appel, and I'm the manager for the MCMC program, and I'll be moderating today's session. We couldn't do what we do without special thanks to our funders, Lumina Foundation and Strata Education Network. Just a couple of housekeeping points. Questions, please submit those through the chat feature, and then follow-up will be done as necessary. And the presentation will be posted, and you can see where you can locate those. Just a brief overview. The mission of the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit is to facilitate an interstate partnership of 13 states and to translate competencies acquired by veterans through military training and experiences toward college credentials. States exchange information and share best practices in the areas of articulation of credit, certification and licensure, communication, and data and technology. Project goals: assist states and post-secondary institutions in aiding military-connected students with critical life transitions from the military to post-secondary education and then from post-secondary education to civilian employment. Increase post-secondary education completion rates by creating models for the consistent, transparent, and effective awarding of credit for military training and experience that can be scaled regionally and nationally, thereby lowering the cost of education and reducing the time to completion. And number 3, establish a strong network of support, communication, documentation, and data collection among institutions and organizations for the purpose of promoting shared interests and tracking the efficacy of efforts to enhance military-connected students' educational success. We do this work through 4 knowledge communities: articulation of academic credit, communication and outreach, data systems and technology, and licensure and certification. I'm happy to be with today's moderators, who are actually the co-chairs of the MCMC Articulation of Academic Credit Knowledge Community. We have Jillian Schulten, who's the Director of Academic Affairs at the Indiana Commission for Higher Education, and Jennifer Timmons, who's Associate Director for Transfer Relations at the University of Iowa. Today's presenters are Lisa Lutz, President, Chief Executive Officer of Solutions for Information Design, and Keith Boring, Program Director, Navy Cool U.S. Navy Credentials Program Office. So Lisa, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Sarah. I appreciate it, and I appreciate everybody joining us today. What I'd like to do is actually ask Keith to give kind of an overview of the service's credentialing programs, which we also call their COOL programs, and he'll explain that. Then I'll go through a few slides to kind of give you some context on credentialing of service members, and then we're going to ask Keith to go out and navigate through some of the COOL websites so you can see some of the functionality and the types of information that's included there. So Keith, before we get started, do you want to give everybody a quick overview?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Keith Boring. I'm a retired Navy Master Chief, and I'm the Director of the Navy's Credentialing Program, also known as Navy Cool, which is pretty much a description of the website of Credentialing Opportunities Online. So COOL is an acronym of Credentialing Opportunities Online. I'm also the chair of the Joint Services Credentialing Working Group, which encompasses each of the services' credentialing programs and their COOL websites. The purpose of the military's credentialing programs and COOL is twofold or multifactored. One, it's required or mandated by law. So the National Defense Authorization Act of 2014 and 15 required all the services to create credentialing programs to promote credentialing throughout its workforces, throughout the military workforce. And also it allowed the services to provide funding towards certifications and licensing for their workforce. And what we mean by the credentials or certifications and licensing is the industry certifications or federally or state mandated licensing. So one, it's required by law, but also the services see it as the right thing to do for their service members. One, it helps with the professionalization of our workforce. So our medical community, our medical enlisted that are getting industry certifications and licensing are getting smarter at their jobs because they're learning an industry standard and bringing that within the military workforce. A culinary specialist learning new cooking or health skills when preparing meals, an IT learning new technologies or anti-hacking technologies and tools. So it makes our workforce smarter and makes the military more efficient, which is obviously what our nation greatly desires. But also as a right thing to do, getting our service members industry credentials while they're in the service helps them in their eventual transition post-service, because absolutely every military member sooner or later will leave the service, and then most, if not all of them, are looking for gainful employment once they leave the service. So by us giving them a credential while they're in an industry certification or license, it helps them transition easier, and it also saves taxpayer dollars because we're paying less unemployment compensation because they're able to get that desired job because they hold that civilian industry certification or license. So the means that we demonstrate that, in which Lisa will go through or surf through here in a bit, is we promote these opportunities through the Navy, or sorry, not the Navy, but each of the services credentialing opportunities online, cool websites. So that's how we promote, and we provide awareness to our service members, but it also is accessible to employers, academic institutions, and credentialing organizations. One thing that I want to make sure to note is the Navy's goals with credentialing and certification, industry certifications and licensing is not as a competition against academic attainment or achievement. It's to collaborate with it. So with the military's program of getting certifications and licensing, we see it as a means that if as an example, a sailor gets a project management certification, a PMP certification, that may lead them in that interest field to go and attain a degree in a similar field. Or in reverse, somebody that's getting an HR degree may find that they need to get that HR certification to better suit themselves or towards employment post once they get out of school. So it's more of a collaboration and a sharing of programs, and the Navy and all the services have programs that ensure our service members get credentials along with degrees and apprenticeships and other off-duty educational opportunities. So with that kind of a broad stroke of why we have the program and the benefits for the service members and the general public, let's see, Lisa, over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Keith. So I thought I'd start by talking a little bit about the evolution of military credentialing. And I think Keith has alluded to this already, but for today's conversation, when we talk about credentialing, we're really talking about primarily licensure and certification. I realize that there is a trend in the civilian workforce, and actually this is taking place in the military as well, to define credentials more broadly as sort of an umbrella term that would capture degrees and certificates, apprenticeships, as well as certifications and licenses. But the COOL programs focus more on certification and licensure, and to a little bit of a lesser degree on apprenticeship. So when I say credential today, I'm primarily talking about certification and licensure. I have been doing work in the area of credentialing of service members and veterans for over 20 years now, and I've seen significant changes in our understanding of how civilian occupational certification and licensure affects individuals who really receive almost all of their occupational training through their military service. The in the late 1990s, we were still really exploring this issue. There was some anecdotal information that was being shared about individuals who would get out of the military with years of experience and considerable training, but not be able to get a comparable job in the civilian workforce because they didn't have the license that was either required by the state or a certification that was being sought by an employer. So around that time, some initial studies were undertaken to assess the extent to which credentialing affects military service members and the types of barriers that they encountered in attaining the civilian licenses and certifications. Through these studies, we started to learn a little bit more about the impact of certification and licensure, and DOD and the military services and some other organizations, some of the veteran service organizations, for example, started exploring ways to help facilitate military service members attaining a civilian credential. For about a decade or so, these initiatives were kind of one-off initiatives. You may have one program in one service but not in another. Early on, the Army and the Navy both had their own cool programs, but the Army program was focused primarily on information dissemination, while the Navy also started paying for credentials. But this has really changed in the last 5 years, due to some degree to political influences. Congress, in its infinite wisdom, as Keith mentioned, has passed some legislation that requires the services to address credentialing a little bit more systematically. But we're now at the point where all services have cool programs, and all of the services pay for credentialing fees for enlisted service members. And when we go through this, we'll be talking primarily about enlisted service members, because unlike officers who typically enter the military with already having a degree, the enlisted service member really attains almost all of their occupational training through the military. So in terms of where we're going, I think we've gotten to the point where we have institutions with the advent of all of the services cool programs and some policies at the DoD level. And now we're looking to embrace opportunities to expand that and to continue to reduce identified barriers. So this next slide asks, why is credentialing good for the military services? And I think Keith has already given you a really good foundation on that. But what I wanted to point out is that 20 years ago, if you asked folks in the service, why is credentialing good for the military services, they'd scratch their head. They might say, well, it's not. It's going to affect our ability to keep these people. If we help them get a IT certification or a healthcare, whatever it might be, certification, that's like giving them a ticket out of the service. Well, studies and experience have really shown that that's not the case. And as Keith mentioned, the services really have embraced credentialing as being good for recruiting, professionalization of the force, retention. You might have to stay in a little bit longer in order to attain a civilian certification or license due to the experience requirements. And then, as he said, also transition. This next slide is intended to give you a sense of the key elements of the services credentialing programs. There are really two key aspects. One is information dissemination, and then the other is payment of credential fees. And for the most part, the services have similar programs. There are just a few things that are a little bit different. In terms of information dissemination, the Marine Corps and the Air Force focus only on enlisted personnel, while the Army has also provided information for warrant officers, and the Navy provides information for both warrant officers and officers. When it comes to payment of voluntary credentialing fees, the Navy, the Marine Corps, and the Air Force pay for, all of the services will pay for enlisted personnel to attain certifications that have been linked to their military occupation, and the Army is paying for some warrant officers as well. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. When I talk about the payment of voluntary credentialing fees, we're typically talking about things like the application fees that go to the certification agency or the state licensing agency, exam fees that might be required, recertification fees, but we're not talking as much about the payment of credential preparation programs. So in terms of that, all of the services will have complimentary tuition assistance programs, which most of you are probably familiar with, where they will pay for degrees and courses towards degrees in traditional colleges and universities. Those programs are guided by some pretty significant DoD policy as to what can be paid for through tuition assistance. And typically that does not include more what we might call non-traditional credential preparation programs, which might include a boot camp that's sponsored by a credentialing agency, that kind of thing. The Air Force is actually conducting a pilot test right now to look at paying for some of those more non-traditional programs as well through its COOL program. Moving on, slide 5. This slide is intended to give you an idea of the wide breadth of occupations in the military services. I like to say that the military is really a microcosm of the civilian workforce. As you can see here, just looking at the top 20 enlisted military occupations, they cover the gamut. We've got healthcare, we have cooks, we have logistics, we have truck drivers. It really covers a wide variety. You'll notice that the first row there, and I believe these are organized from the most populated military occupations and their civilian equivalents. The first row talks about military-specific occupations. There are some military occupations that don't have a direct civilian equivalent in the military workforce. These are things like the infantry person, the field artillery jobs, that kind of thing. But for the most part, most military occupations do have some form of civilian occupational equivalent. When we do analysis, so my company, Solid, supports the research and analysis that's done for all of the services COOL programs. And what we do is we go in and we actually compare the military occupational duties and training to the civilian credentialing requirements and the certification or licensure exam domains. And when we're doing this comparison, we typically categorize the way in which a certification or a license is linked to a military occupation into one of 3 categories. There are some credentials that are directly related to the military occupation. In other words, they map to most of the military occupational duties. There are other credentials that are more related to a particular embedded skill set or a critical task that's performed within that occupation. And those are, related only to some of the military occupational duties. And then we also map to what we call other and advanced certifications. These tend to be more specialized certifications, that don't necessarily apply to the military, but when somebody transitions out of the military, they might want to consider them, or they might be more advanced the eligibility might be more advanced than what you would expect the average enlisted service member to hold. And as Keith goes through and demonstrates some portions of the COOL websites, we'll talk a little bit more about these categorizations. The ability of a service member to attain a civilian credential is really dependent to some degree on the eligibility requirements for the certification or the license. The 4 kinds of eligibility requirements that we typically talk about are there may be some education and training requirements. This could be a degree, it could be just a number of semester hours, or it could be training by a particular approved training program. There may be work experience requirements. Almost always there's going to be some form of an exam associated with the credential. It could be a written exam, an oral exam, or a practical exam. And then there may be some other types of requirements. For state licensure, this could be residency. You have to be a resident of the state. Sometimes it's things as simple as minimum age requirements, that kind of thing. So the types of credentialing requirements really drive the extent to which which a service member could attain the credential. And what we've found is that those credentials that have education prerequisites tend to be the ones that are more difficult for service members to meet, just because, again, thinking of the enlisted community, not all of them are going to have post-secondary degrees. Now, many will, but not everybody will. So it's when you start finding those credentials that have an associate's degree or higher requirement is where you're going to find a little bit more challenge for the enlisted service members. So the goal for the services cool programs is to really incorporate the concept of credentialing into the entire military life cycle so that service members become aware of civilian credentials that might be related to their military occupation, and they can begin pursuing them early in their military careers and attaining the experience or attaining through tuition assistance the coursework or degrees that might be required to help them get the certification or license. For any individual service member, there's a number of factors that are going to impact their ability to attain the civilian credential. Some service members come into the military with prior education, training, or experience, which may make them better qualified to attain a certification or a license. Within the military, there are a number of ways to attain skills in a particular occupational area, whether it's formal training that's actually done in a classroom, on-the-job training, or experience that's gained through collateral duties that a service member might hold. So almost every service member has a primary military occupation, say it's a truck driver in the Army, but they may also have collateral duties. They might be a command fitness leader where they have to help their fellow service members with their fitness requirements. So that opens up some additional opportunities in terms of types of credentials that might be relevant to them. The voluntary education that they pursue while they're in the military can affect it. And then certainly once they've identified a specific credential goal, what they do to attain that credential will affect their ability to pass the exam. The extent to which a military occupation aligns to a civilian certification or license varies. We've captured here 3 scenarios. In the first scenario, the military training is completely aligned with the credential exam objectives. That would mean that you'd expect that that service member could sit for the exam, assuming they meet the other eligibility requirements, and would be able to pass the exam without any additional study. There are no knowledge gaps, so to speak. The second scenario, it shows basically that the military training is somewhat aligned with the credential exams, but there may be some gaps in knowledge. And then in the third scenario, there could be significant gaps between the military training and what's covered on the credential exam. I will say that scenario 1 is really the exception. There's only a couple of occupational areas in the military where the military training completely aligns to the civilian certification or licensing exam. And that tends to be in occupational areas that have a high degree of similarity with their with their civilian counterparts. So healthcare, military healthcare training and duties tend to align pretty closely with civilians. Similarly, in the IT arena, we see a high degree of alignment between the military training and experience and the civilian credential exam requirements. More often than not, though, there will be some gaps between the military training and the civilian credential exam. And what the military is really looking for here is not, we're not asking anybody to ignore those gaps and just grant the credential just because the individual served in the military, but they want to receive maximum credit from credentialing agencies and academia for their military training and experience. And they want to be given access to opportunities to fill gaps while they're in the military. This next slide really just highlights some of the key methods that could be used to fill the credentialing gaps. Sometimes it may just be study materials. It may be, working on your own time to fill those knowledge gaps. Other times there may be training or education that's required. The military offers, the on-the-job training that they may attain throughout the course of their career can help them fill those knowledge gaps. And then the military offers e-learning opportunities free of charge to service members that might be helpful to them in filling those credentialing gaps. This slide is just intended to demonstrate the complexity of the civilian, the U.S. civilian credentialing system and then how the military fits within it. There are a lot of folks and policymakers, I think, who kind of go into looking at issues around credentialing of service members and veterans as black and white. It's like, why don't we just recognize their training? Or why doesn't the military just adapt its training? But there's so many different complexities involved in the credentialing ecosystem within the United States that there's not a simple solution like that. And so really all of the stakeholders that are shown, that are depicted on this slide, from state licensing agencies to institutional and programmatic accreditors, the academic institutions, the national certification agencies, all of them play some role in helping to break down any barriers that might exist to facilitate credentialing of service members. The American Legion issued a report in 2016 that kind of captured the current state of credentialing, which was appropriate because actually 20 years ago, the American Legion was actually one of the first national organizations to systematically address the issue, and they've remained interested in it over the years. They have identified 8 opportunities for action, steps that could be taken to further reduce barriers to credentialing. I'm happy to say that the first opportunity for action was actually seized already. When the American Legion's report was issued early last year, the post-9/11 GI Bill did not provide as good of a certification and licensing benefit as the Montgomery GI Bill did. But Congress corrected that last year, so we can check that one off the list. The remaining 7 opportunities for action kind of vary. One is to ensure the quality of certification programs. I suspect that many of you are in the higher education community and are very familiar with accreditation as it relates to higher education, but you might not be aware that there is accreditation of certification programs as well to help ensure the quality of those programs, and that the certifications actually are measuring competency for the occupations they claim to address. Unfortunately, accreditation of certification programs has not been demanded as much as accreditation of higher education programs and institutions. So the extent to which civilian certification programs are accredited is relatively low, and estimates show that probably only about a quarter of civilian certification programs have been through a formal accreditation process. That doesn't mean that the certification, it does not have value and isn't quality. It just means that there hasn't been a third party that's reviewed it. An example that we like to use is the Automotive Service Excellence Certification Program, which, if any of you have gone to your local garage to get your car fixed recently, almost all of them talk about having ACE certified, ASE certified mechanics. It's really the industry standard right now, but the Automotive Service Excellence Certification Agency has not gone through an accreditation process. So one of the things that we do is encourage certification programs to take that extra step and go through the process. The third area for action, opportunity for action, is to ensure the quality of non-traditional credential preparation programs. As I mentioned earlier, the services have really relied on traditional programs for ways to, as a means of preparing service members for credentials. However, there are a lot of non-traditional credential programs that have picked up over recent years that are not necessarily affiliated with a college or university, but can really help service members prepare for an exam. An example that I give here is the project management professional boot camps that are out there. I've known folks who have been project managers for 20 plus years who wouldn't be able to sit for the PMI, the Project Management Institute's certification without having done some additional study, and the boot camps are very helpful in that regard. However, if they're not affiliated with a college or university, or if they don't have credit hours associated with them, it makes it difficult for the services the services don't have a good way of determining the quality of the program because they're not subject to the same academic, accreditation requirements. So there's an opportunity here as well. Better identify the labor market demand for credentials. In some occupational areas, like in the IT arena, there's a lot of research that's been done about the extent to which certification or a license helps you, or certification in particular, helps you get a job in the civilian workforce. Excuse me. That is not true, though, across occupational areas. So we'd like to see more systematic research on the labor market demand. The cool websites, and Keith will probably point this out when we go out to the sites and demonstrate them, we have incorporated some indicators of demand. The U.S. Department of Labor has started capturing this information in the past 2 or 3 years, where they'll go out and they'll look at online job ads and determine the extent to which a certification is noted as a prerequisite for attaining the job. And so we've got some indication of that now, which is very helpful. Tracking credential attainment outcomes is somewhat related to looking at the labor market demand. If someone attains a credential, what does that do for them in the labor market? What is that? Does that help them get a job? Does it increase their pay? Does it increase their promotion potential? Again, we'd like to see more research in that area as well.
Hey, Lisa, this is Jillian. We had a question come up, and it was just clarifying the statement that was made, and it's the military offers e-learning opportunities at no cost to service members. What type of e-learning opportunities are free?
There are a variety, and Keith, please feel free to weigh in here as it relates to the Navy, but the services have contracted with different vendors that offer online learning, and oftentimes it might be in the IT arena. It could be online training that would help you prepare for an IT certification exam, but it cuts across other occupational areas as well. Keith, do you want to say any more about that?
Right, yeah, the services have their own variety and blends of computer-based training that's generated from within the DoD and the services through national cryptologic schools, through various service schools. So they develop their own internal computer-based training and downloadable content and ebook contents, as well as vendor, that they've contracted out for vendors to create e-learning portals content, but also other opportunities such as Safari Books Online, which is a complement of thousands of books and video trainers and EPUBs and ebooks that are made available through the DoD MWR system that allows sailors or service members access to study programs.
I hope that helps. Just really quickly, I'll go through the 3 remaining opportunities for action that were identified in the Legion report. Reducing state licensure barriers. Service members face a great difficulty sometimes when they transition out of the service and they've worked in an occupation for many years, but they don't have the license that's required to perform work in that particular state. So there have actually been a number of initiatives that have been underway within states to require state licensing agencies to recognize equivalent military training and experience for state licensure purposes. I know that a lot of the folks who've been involved in MCMC are familiar with these. MCMC has taken this on as an area that it would like to address, and one of the ways that they've been able to do that is by increasing academia's understanding of military training and experiences and the resources that are out there to help them assess that training and experience for college credit recommendations. Finally, the number 7, we'd like to see a repository of information on best practices in facilitating credentialing of service members and veterans. There are a lot of organizations like MCMC and others that have gone to great lengths to facilitate credentialing, and we'd like for other stakeholders to be able to learn from that. And then finally, ensure military and veteran credentialing interests are represented in civilian workforce credentialing initiatives. There are a lot of different things that are being done in the civilian world to increase the transparency behind credentials, what they are, what competencies they speak to, who's recognizing them. And so the Legion was just encouraging the military to stay abreast of those issues because they have a big impact on service members as well. This is our contact information, and then the next few slides, which again are downloadable from the website, that are really reference slides, so you'll be able to access the cool websites and just get a little bit more information about them. But rather than going through these slides, I thought, whoops, I'll go back. I think I'm going to switch over to the web and actually demonstrate some of the cool programs. I'm going to have Keith walk you through. Oops, let's see, wrong one. You should be seeing Army Cool now. Keith, are you seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, and before I go on, I think I have lost the chat window, but I think there was an additional question or comment about the e-learning opportunities, and I believe the point that was being made was that those e-learning opportunities don't guarantee that you'll pass the exam, the certification exam, and that's absolutely correct. It's more of a method of preparation or a method of increasing your ability to pass the exam. So Keith, would you like to walk us through some of these sites, and I'll drive for you?
Sure, and this will be a collaboration between Lisa and me, because I'll kind of do a high-level overview of the cool sites, and then she'll jump in as well. Go ahead.
Sorry to interrupt you, Keith. This is Jillian. We had a question real quick.
Okay.
It's saying that they heard that some driving experiences, which are identified in your military driver's license, are beginning to be accepted in the civilian side for CDL licenses. Some licenses in the trades require working as a journeyman under someone who has a license. Has this program helped those who want to take the test for that license?
So this is Keith, and Lisa will may also be able to jump in. Yes, all the services are involved with the Department of Transportation's Federal Motor Carriers Association, FMCSA, I believe it is, in a program where the services that have truck driving occupations formally document their experience, training, and military driver's license into an acceptable form that will be accepted by the state driver's license agencies. Right now, the driving portion of the driving test for the CDL can be waived, and I believe over 9,000 military members have already been through that process. And the Department of Transportation is also working on waiving the written portion of the CDL exam as well, because the services are able to sufficiently show the Department of Transportation that they have met all the components for not only the skills portion of the test, but the knowledge portion of the test.
Yep. And I would just say that although the U.S. Department of Transportation sets the overall minimum standards for state commercial driver's licenses, it is up to each individual state to adopt, its own practices. So any waivers would have to be coming from the state level. And I think Keith mentioned that all 50 states will currently waive the skills test, and some states are considering waiving the knowledge part as well.
And we have one other question as well, just about the tracking of credentials. And so the question is there any method for the career managers of each specialty to be able to track which credentials their personnel have attained? An example is in the Army, will it show up in the EDAS or somewhere that career managers can track it?
The answer is yes, and that's already happening. And for the greater portion, jointly, it's through the Joint Service Transcript, which encompasses all the services. So the Joint Service Transcripts is the location where education, training, experience, apprenticeships are all recorded for the service member. And those Joint Service Transcripts are also able to be sent out to academic institutions. The individual may hold it. And the Joint Service Transcript feeds into each of the services' unique HR systems where supervisors, leadership, and commands can see the progress of their military members.
Okay. All right, Keith, do you want to go through some of these sites then?
So this is going to be a quick flyby, so feel free to surf the cool sites on your own to explore. Easiest way to find cool is just Google Navy cool, Army cool, Air Force cool. Just Google where the first things that pop up. And what we'll do is we're going to jump some tabs. Right now you're looking at Army cool, and you kind of see the kind of layout and feel. We'll jump to Department of the Navy cool. And we call it Department of the Navy cool. It's a landing page for the Navy and Marine Corps and Department of the Navy civilians, because some may not be aware that the Marine Corps is a component of the Department of the Navy. So the Marines are within the Navy, kind of administratively. Let's see, we'll jump to the Marine Corps, so the Navy cool specifically.
All right, I went to the wrong page. There we go.
Yep, so you're on the Navy cool, which you'll see has a similar styling as the Army cool. We'll go to Marine Corps cool. Same styling as Army and Navy cool. And then the AFVEC Air Force. They're the odd ones out. They had a different web programmer that they were restricted to use. But all the components that you find on all the other services cool, you'll find on the Air Force cool as well. So there's nothing missing, no gaps, same data, same analysis. And the reason why all the services want the same information is, we want academia, we want industry, we want employers to be able to also find service members using cool, so they have a better awareness of what the service member does. So right now what we'll do is we'll just surf Navy cool because I'm Navy, and we'll run that. So the home page of Navy cool, you've got all your standard information of overview, basics, funding, resources, news information, and contact information, as well as being able to drill down to finding what credentials best map to a particular MOS, occupation, rating, AFSC within the services, as well as other drop-downs that help lead service members to credentialing opportunities. So what we'll do is we'll pull up a rating, and one of them that kind of hot in industry is obviously the medical community. So we'll pull up the hospital corpsman. Most of the services have a medical component, a medical occupation. The only one that does not is the Marine Corps. So the Navy's medical community services the Marine Corps. you won't find any medical on the Marine Corps Cool. As you scroll down, all the pages run and operate the same. So you get a general description of the occupation we're looking at, which is the hospital corpsman. Some of the next section down, or the little lower in the white, is you got a little bit higher up, Lisa, is the hospital corpsman jobs. And what we're not talking about civilian jobs. We're talking kind of occupational fields within the Navy's healthcare system, or the Navy's enlisted medical system. That covers everything from a phlebotomy to optician to x-ray tech to med lab tech, all the specializations that are done within the Navy's enlisted medical fields. Scrolling down a little bit lower, we start getting into the credentials that are recommended to the hospital corpsman based off of the work that or the training they've received in the Navy, plus the experience. Right now we're on the hospital corpsman, the entirety of the hospital corpsman occupation, and obviously you'd have to drill down to find out if you're only specifically interested in the X-ray tech. You'd drill down to the X-ray tech to see what certs best align to an X-ray tech. As an example, I believe, let's see, a hospital corpsman basic. We'll stay on this page. So as you scroll down a little bit, you'll start seeing tabs for national certifications of licensing, apprenticeships, state licensing. That'll give you an idea of what we recommend to the service member based off of the military training. On the national certifications and licensing tab, scrolling down in the gray left navigation, you have all kinds of like eBay type of filterable things that you can filter on. What's on demand, what's not in demand, what's funded by the Navy, what isn't, what has a training gap analysis, what's paid by the GI Bill, which ones are accredited. That helps the sailor or the veteran utilize COOL to get drilled down to the specific information that they're interested in. The variety of columns you see, but what credential that best maps to that military occupation, what credentialing agency manages that. For the Navy, you'll see a Navy Bucks icon. We call it Navy Bucks, and that just means where the sailor sees that square, that Navy dollar sign, that means the Navy's credentialing program will pay for that certification's application fees, exam fees, and annual maintenance fees, because we want them to stay certified, credentialed throughout the continuum of their Navy career. That helps them out. We have a column on gap analysis if there is one that's been completed, such as that example. We have the ladder for the Navy. It's a learning and development roadmap icon, which it helps us to direct sailors to what credential has the most impact towards their career right now. If you're only an E4 junior enlisted, you might want to work on something that is best aligned to you as opposed to something that's far beyond what you have experience to do yet. There's a column for GI Bill if the credential is funded through the GI Bill, and then a column for accreditation where if a sailor is interested in a particular credential that meets a accreditation standard, ANSI, NCCA, or ISO standard, they'll be able to drill down and find those credentials. And as Lisa mentioned, you see those red chili peppers next to some credentials. Those indicate that the Department of Labor has indicated those are high demand in industry through looking at various job postings. So a sailor that is getting ready to, or a service member getting ready to separate from the service may want to work on a credential that is in high in demand. That way they have a higher chance at post-service employment, immediate employment, or higher pay in their paychecks. So what we'll do is for training gap analysis, because we've talked a lot about how we fill in training, we'll go to Hospital Corpsman Basic, which is all hospital corpsmen. They all get the basic training. We'll drill down to what has the gap analysis, and then we'll go to the NCLEX, because that is also a very high in-demand credential out in the medical community. So clicking on the gap analysis brings us to a page of summary information, so the sailor can see generally what is the NCLEX, who it applies to, provides them links to get to the credentialing agency site for more information. We provide them a summary of how, the eligibility, recertification, agency contact. So give kind of a snapshot so they don't have to surf a credentialing agency's website to try to find all of this information. Clicking on eligibility, we look up the eligibility to earn that credential, and that's very helpful because a lot of sailors may not have the eligibility just yet, or be fully eligible, or may need that additional academic training to meet the eligibility factors. The important one we're looking at next is the training versus the exam. So Solid, in all of their analysis through the various credentialing requirements, they have documented what they found as or what's on the exam, or what are the domains that are being tested for that credential, where possible, where it's weighted. So this gives an indication to the sailor what domains that they need to either be fully understanding and studied up for, or what to fill gaps. And then the far column, where they're trained, and if they're trained fully or partially in that domain, that civilian domain. So as you see, there's some partials, and then there's a lot of fulls, and then there's some full training, and some blanks. Where you see that they've been fully trained towards that, was that Lisa?
Yeah, go ahead, continue, and then I'll add something.
Yep. So where you see that they've been fully trained, so the Navy's curriculum, Navy's training or experience fully prepared them for that particular topic of that exam. Where it's partially, that the Navy's training system or experience may have partially trained them, therefore they need to fill that gap, and that's where academia can help fill that gap. And where there is a blank, that means there is that topic is not trained in the military service. And obviously, within the military, we train to national security requirements, warfighting mission. So we can't add every component of a certification or license into our military training pipeline. Lisa, did you have?
Yeah, I was just going to underscore that this column is the Navy's A school, which is basically the school, the initial school that the sailor goes through to attain their training. For some certifications, we've also identified other schools, other courses, and those would be shown here as well.
So that gives kind of an idea, and then there's a variety of other tabs on the snapshot page. But we want to be able to show sailors that, hey, you've already been trained to do this work. You're already performing this work. Now we want you to get that civilian certification, so it makes you smarter at your job, but also it's something that you're going to want to have or need to have post-service. So we want to show them any additional considerations, and then related occupations, because we want to be able to show them, because you're a hospital corpsman, you can go in from the basic or the straight corpsman occupations into the rating to do this kind of work. So it helps bring people in, helps to keep our service members smarter, and then helps them post-service. Some of the other things that you may find on Navy Cool, so if we go back to a rating page, I guess if we back up to one of the rating pages.
Want to pick another one this time?
Sure. It'll be any one of them. So this is a construction electrician. You'll see that the pages operate similarly the same, but below the related credentials, we also present other information. We show them related occupations. We want the service member to be able to see what civilian-related occupations, so they know how to translate what they do in the military into civilian speak, and what jobs they should be looking at post-service. And a little bit lower, below the civilian occupations or the occupations, continuing education. We have a continuing education tab because it is still very important, even though the services credentialing programs are promoting certifications and licensure. We don't want them to skip or miss the opportunity to get that academic degree that 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 program knocked out, because it is highly valuable within the service and obviously post-service. So the services also show whether there's a SOC DNS network, whether there's a joint service transcript that can show what credits that are recommended based off the military training, and then tuition assistants decide, so they can make a decision, a smart decision based off of what they're doing in the Navy, what college degree best aligns to the work that they're doing in the military. So that's the quick kind of flyby of cool, and especially Navy cool. There's a lot more to explore. There's a lot more features and benefits within it for not only the service member, but for academia to be able to surf and explore to see what opportunities that they can help service members get a degree, whether it be helping them get more credits towards what they've already attained because of military service, or help them better decide what degree programs they should be getting involved with because of their military occupation. So there's a lot of tools, and you're welcome to give Lisa or myself a call, and we can do individualized surfing of the cool websites for you so you can get a better understanding of how to navigate it yourself. Lisa, anything else to add?
Very good. No, I don't think so, Keith. I'll send it back to the moderators. How does TA work with these credits? Was a question, it looks like. Keith, do you want to take that one?
Tuition assistance, the services tuition assistance is only authorized to pay for academic courses. Each of the services certifications and licensing program has a separate funding, separate authority to pay for certification and licensing exams and fees. For educational or academic programs, that's through tuition assistance, and it's a separate pot of money, separate program, and limitations and funding authorities.
The next question, it looks like, has to do with college credit, and I think there's a couple of points to be made there. One is, as many of you know, the American Council on Education will review military training and experience and make college credit recommendations that can be evaluated and used by colleges and universities. The American Council on Education actually also does make credit recommendations for certifications that somebody attains as well. So if a service member has a certification in addition to getting credit for their military training, a college or university might also consider awarding credit for the certification. And looking at Susan's point, there is a bill that was introduced in the House on Monday that would allow tuition assistance to pay for certification fees. Right now, the services pay for certifications and licenses outside of the tuition assistance budget. And website, how often will it be updated? If you mean the cool websites, they're updated on a monthly basis. We are constantly reviewing the new certifications that might come to play, changes in military occupations, changes in military duties, or training, I should say, and that information gets updated on a regular basis. And point from a friend, Joe, the Army will have credentialing assistance beginning in FY19 for certification and licenses expenses not already covered by tuition assistance, which is good news. They're already funding some, but it will be a little bit more widespread. Joe, thank you for that point. And Susan, thank you for the link to that article about the tuition assistance.
Well, thank you, Keith and Lisa, for the wonderful webinar that you provided to us today. This webinar has been recorded and can be viewed at the link at the top of the slide here. We actually have a webinar scheduled April 18th, still on the topic of credentialing, but we'll be talking about the Credential Engine. And Lisa will be back with us to talk about Credential Engine. We have our annual meeting this year on May 3rd and 4th, but new Thursday evening and all day Friday is open to any college and university or other nonprofit organizations who work with military-connected students. There's no fee for registration. All you need to do is find your transportation to that meeting, and I can guarantee the food is fabulous. For additional information, there's the link at the bottom of that slide. And, of course, you can always find us on Facebook. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to contact me. I'm Sarah Appel, the manager for the Multi-State Collaborative on Military Credit. Thank you all very much. Have a good afternoon.